In this episode of B.Hooked Knitting, we're going to learn how to knit the seed stitch. For supplies list and written instructions, please visit knitting.bhookedcrochet.com/seed stitch. Let's begin. To work any project with the seed stitch, you're going to need to cast on an even number of stitches. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm just going to work up a little swatch, so I'm going to cast on 12 stitches using the long tail cast on. Now I do have a very slow beginner friendly version of the long tail cast on. I'll link to that as well so you can have a look at that video. Once you have 12 loops on your needle, then we can go ahead and start working the pattern. And the seed stitch is really simple. It's really only a single row repeat. The most important thing for you to remember is that you're going to knit the purls and purl the knits. Okay, so we're going to do the opposite. When we work our first row, honestly, we can start with either first. We can start doing knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, or we could start purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. The objective is that we're alternating them. Now, I personally like to work with knit stitches a little bit better, so I like to start with that first. So I'm going to knit, and I will show this demonstration with two different techniques. So you can either hold the working yarn in your dominant hand or your non-dominant hand. I'm pretty comfortable with both. I know there are many people that aren't, so I'm going to demonstrate how I do this with both techniques, starting with the American or the English knitting style. So I'm going to begin by knitting the first stitch and purling the second stitch. So I'm going to pull the yarn to the front to work my purl. Pull the yarn back to the back and knit the next stitch. Pull the yarn to the front, purl the next. And then you're just going to repeat that until the end of the row. And when you get to the end of the row, you'll just turn your work. And the most important thing in this lesson really is to learn how to read your knitting. So you have to know what a knit looks like and what a purl looks like in order to knit the purls and purl the knits. So one way I like to remember it is that knits generally look like they have V's and purls have little bars. So the first stitch is typically a little hard to tell. This is a knit on this side, and you can't really see the V here because it's the end stitch. But if you look here, you'll see this little bar, so I know that's a purl stitch. And here is a knit right here. You see that V right there? So that's how I know it's a knit. And then I have a bar and a V and a bar and a V. And that's how you can stay on track if you happen to get distracted or anything like that. Now I'm going to switch back over to the Continental style where I'm holding the yarn with my non-dominant hand. And since the first stitch is a knit, then I know I need to purl that. So I'm pulling the working yarn to the front. I will insert my needle purlwise and wrap that yarn to purl the first stitch. Then I know this is a purl, so I need to knit it. You'll pull the yarn back to the back. Alright, next stitch we're going to purl, so we'll pull it to the front to purl the stitch, push it in back. We're going to knit the next. And just to repeat that, so we're going to be shifting our working yarn from front to back as we knit and purl, and we want to make sure that we are knitting the knits. Excuse me, you want to make sure that you are knitting the purls and you're purling the knits. All you need to do to finish your project is repeat that over and over. So now as we progress to the third row here, our first stitch now is a purl. You see that little bar there? So that's how I know that I need to start off with a knit. So I'm just going to knit the first stitch here and then purl the next. And so we're just repeating that over and over. Making sure that we're knitting the purls and we're purling the knits. Now you'll just repeat this row until your work measures the proper length. So if you're doing just a little test swatch, it's probably a good idea to work several rows just to get the hang of the stitch. It's a little bit different when you're going from front to back with that working yarn, so that is a little bit of a trick to get the hang of. And so you'll want to do that, make sure your tension is right and that you're able to see your stitches so you know what you're supposed to be doing. Now one thing I recommend you'll probably notice is that I'm using a bulky weight yarn, and that's really good to practice on because you can see the stitches. So that is my really big tip. If this is a new stitch to you, use a bulky weight yarn that you have in your stash so that you can determine what the stitches are if you're not already familiar with doing that. So go ahead and knit up a few rows. I'm going to do the same, and then I want to show you how to bind off in this stitch. After you've worked several rows, then you'll really start to see the pattern emerge. And as you can tell, this is a sort of a thick fabric that it creates. It's really squishy and a little bit stretchy as well. The other thing that you'll notice is that it's reversible. It looks the same on the front and the back, and that makes it really great for projects that, you know, you're going to see the front and the back. So scarves are the first thing that come to mind. It's actually one of the best projects to practice the seed stitch with, is just to make a seed stitch scarf. You can cast on any number of stitches that is an even number and work through your scarf. You'll get this technique down in no time, and then you'll have a really warm, soft scarf. Okay, so after you have worked several rows, then how do you bind off in this stitch? Well, the technique of binding off is technically the same. So you're going to work a stitch, well, you're going to work 2 stitches at the beginning, and then you're going to pass one over to bind it off. The important part is that you continue maintaining your pattern. So we're going to have a look at what I have here. So my first stitch is a knit stitch. So I know that I need to purl the first stitch. Got to get my yarn situated there. Alright, so we purl the first stitch, slide that off, and then we need to knit the next stitch because it's a purl, right? So I'm just going to continue in pattern for these first 2 stitches. Now we can go ahead and pass the first over that last. So just work your needle under it, kind of pull it out towards you, get some looseness there, and then slide it over. Not split your yarn, there we go. Slide it over and then you'll bind that off. Now just take a close look at the next stitch. I have a knit here, so that means I need to purl. So I'm going to pull my yarn forward, purl this stitch, then I just pull the yarn to the back because it's a habit. Now I can go ahead and pull this stitch over to bind off. Now one of the tricks to binding off is that you want to make sure that you are trying to maintain the same tension. It's really easy to kind of get carried away with this process of binding them off, and if your bind off is a lot tighter than the bottom edge or just the rest of your knitting, then you are going to see that difference. So it's just something that comes with practice. You know, I don't think binding off is a very enjoyable process for anybody. So we'll just grab this back one, and part of the way that I maintain my tension is pulling on them. So my stitches here, I mean obviously you can't see in the video, but they are tighter than the rest of them, and like I said, it's just because it's the bind off. So when I put my needle into that stitch and pull out, I am sort of loosening up my tension and helping my project in the process. So my next stitch is a purl, so I need to knit that, pass it over. Okay, and that's all there is to the bind off for this seed stitch. You can see now that it maintains the pattern all the way through, and that's your main goal.